Oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. The reason Keir Starmer has, 25, whatever ridiculous lead he has in the polls, a lead I refuse to believe, is not because Keir Starmer is the love child of Tony Blair and Clement Attlee. It's not because he's some super Barack Obama-esque politician. He's in the right place at the right time. Let's be very honest about that.
This is Matt Chorley from Times Radio, joined by Mehdi Hasan, a journalist, interviewer, born in Swindon, now a big American TV star.
I wouldn't go that far. But
you've got a show on MSNBC with your name in the title. That's pretty good. And now you've got a book as well, Mehdi Hasan, Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading and Public Speaking. So are you spawning for a fight today? Do you approach everything like this?
I don't approach everything like this, but I'm ready.
You're ready?
I'm ready. I'm always ready. I'm poised.
And when you say win the argument, do you mean, and clearly you cover a lot of American politics and you interview politicians, but when we're talking about winning an argument, do you mean persuading the other person to agree with you, or just duffing them up and making them look daft so that nobody else agrees with them?
And my answer is, it depends.
Okay.
Context is everything, and the book is written for a general audience, right? It's not just written for politicians or journalists or lawyers. I genuinely tried to write it for everyone, and so it depends what context you're in. The skill set that I present in the book and the tips that I give that aren't all original, some of them go back to Aristotle more than 2,000 years ago. Basic art of rhetoric, art of persuasion, connecting with people. It depends what you want to do. So if you win an argument, and I've done this myself in very different ways, I'm sure you have too, Matt. It's different to try and convince 12 jurors or 1 million people watching a presidential debate, or your uncle at the Thanksgiving table, as they say in the United States, or your mate down the pub. Yeah. Very different strategies will be deployed. And yes, sometimes you're trying to persuade the other person, but sometimes you're not. Yeah. When I interviewed John Bolton on my show, right, we went at it on Iraq. It's now the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War. A couple of years ago, I grilled him hard on Iraq. I wasn't trying to change his mind. That would be mad. You're not going to change John Bolton's mind on Iraq 18 years after the war. But what I was trying to do is persuade the audience at home that what John Bolton did was wrong, and here's my evidence for it, and let's see if John can defend himself. So sometimes we get so lost in convincing ourselves or the other person, we forget about the audience. And I say the first chapter in the book is the audience is king, the audience is key. That matters more than anything else. But of course, if there's no audience, it's just you and your Trump-loving uncle around the Thanksgiving table, or you and your Brexit-loving cousin, you need to work with them directly. You're going to use a different skill set for the book, but the book covers different ways of persuading.
Do you think right now, 2023, we're all less open to persuasion?
Yeah.
We all start from a much tougher position.
Yeah, both sides of the Atlantic. It's depressing to see how polarized we've become, how partisan we've become, how ensconced inside of our social media bubbles we've become. And one of the reasons I wrote the book was partly because I'm fed up with the degradation of our public discourse by all the kind of gaslighters and con men who've taken over our politics on both sides of the Atlantic, but also because I genuinely believe that you've got to be able to see more than one side of an argument, even if you disagree with it. Like, I have very strong views. People who know me know I'm a black and white kind of guy often. But even then, I want to know the black and the white, as it were. And I say in the book, you've got to know your opponent's argument better than you know your own argument. You've got John Stuart Mill. You cannot know your own side of the argument until you know the other side. I'm a great believer in that dictum. I read a lot of right-wing media, even though I'm on the left. I've watched a lot of right-wing TV. I don't believe you can just cut yourself off and say, I have confirmation bias is the worst thing in the world.
When was the last time you changed your mind about something? Somebody persuaded you of something that you'd previously held?
That's a great question. I think Joe Biden persuaded me that he's better than I thought he was. Joe Biden's supporters persuaded me that he's better than I thought he was. And I got a lot of flack from some on the left and right in America because I said in a recent interview he's the most impressive president of my lifetime. I did add a second sentence, that's a low bar from the presidents of my lifetime, like Reagan, Bush, Trump, Clinton. Yeah, I do. I like to think that I do get persuaded on certain things. I'm not close-minded, but obviously I have strong views as well. Again, it depends what you're trying to do. One of the things I say in the book is some people say to me, Matt, but why would you want to win every argument? You've got to be open. Of course, I'm not saying you should.
It's exhausting, isn't it? Constantly arguing.
Well, that's a separate argument. Sometimes you get a choice. But my point is sometimes you have to win an argument. Not everyone has a choice. Like some people are like, I don't like arguing. I stay away. I keep my head down. Great for you. But if you live in a democracy that's under threat, and I currently live in a democracy which is very precarious, you can't keep your head down and stay out of things. You have to speak up and speak out. But think about a prosecutor in court who's trying to put away a murderer. Yeah, he's not trying to see the other side. He needs to put that guy behind. He needs to convince 12 people to put that guy behind bars. If you're in a job interview, I call that an argument. You're trying to make the case for yourself. You need to get that job. You're not going to be like, well, let me give a pros and you tell me why I'm not good for this job. You're not going to do that. So some people don't get a choice.
One of the things that's striking in your sort of assessment of British and American politics is that the characterisation, the sort of the stereotype, the British are the sort of stiff upper lip, ultra polite, and it's the brash Americans.
Yeah, it's the other way around.
And actually you think it's the other way around when it
100%.
comes to political debate.
100%. Political debate, political journalism, very much so. I've spent nearly a decade in the US, nearly 2 years at MSNBC, and you realise that they're a lot of people, for them there's a lot of lines they don't want to cross, and people like me are seen as in your face, bit rude, aggressive. I told this joke last week when I was doing an event in DC with Jen Psaki, who's the former White House press secretary. So she's also a new colleague of mine. She's launching a show on MSNBC. So she and I did a book event for me. And I mentioned this to her. I said, did you know that when you came on my show, she came on my show, actually I was sitting in for another host, and I interviewed her and I grilled her. And MSNBC is seen as a liberal channel, a lot of Democrats think maybe we might get a softballs there, but we're not Fox, so we can do Fox on a different level. But Jen Psaki, I grilled her. She was fine with it. She can take the number of people who said to me afterwards on social media, how dare you speak to the White House press secretary? It was a mixture of like, you as supposedly on the left, liberal, and also, that's not how you speak to people in power. And I'm like, I said years ago that the US media needs a bunch of Jeremy Paxmans to parachute in. It would shake things up a bit. Now, right now, there's just me, I guess.
Do you think it's because the president is head of state in a way
Partly.
that, we give the prime minister a kick in, but the monarchy is like, well, thank you very much for coming.
I think that's part of it,
yeah.
Certainly with the president. But it only goes so far as explanation, because how do you explain senators, governors, ambassadors? There's one joke I made when I went on late night TV a few years ago. I said, you guys keep your titles forever.
Yeah.
That's weird. Like in a democracy, there's Secretary Clinton, Governor Romney, or now Senator Romney. But at the time it was like Ambassador Mayor Giuliani. Mayor of what? He hasn't been mayor of New York for over 20, whatever years. So and there's a weird deference to titles and positions, and maybe it is, people say it's a respect for the office, which Trump came along and defiled the office as well. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's also a cultural thing. I think outside of politics as well, Americans are just friendlier. Yeah. We're just a little bit ruder. A little bit, go on the tube versus go on the metro in where I am. I think it's also a cultural thing where have a nice day is also important into politics. Have a nice interview.
Can you explain Gish gallopers? Because it's a great phrase. It's the way you describe how Donald Trump approaches interviews.
So it's a phrase that was coined by a scientist named Eugenia Scott, who watched what was happening in the 90s. And if you go on YouTube, Matt, there's a whole you get lost in a rabbit hole. There were all these debates that were done between creationists, between Christians who say no evolution, Bible literal explanation of the world, and evolutionary biologists said, yeah, we'll debate you in universities. And the evolutionary biologists got crushed, even though they had all the science, all the data. They're not good at debating. And what the creationists did, and a guy called Dwayne Gish, is they galloped all over them. They just threw a bunch of out-of-context studies, cherry-picked statistics, false quotes, lies, a blizzard of them at speed, like an auctioneer. And the crowd thinks, well, the scientist didn't rebut everything that person said. Maybe he's got a point. So what the Gish galloper does is, I throw a bunch of stuff at you, deflections, distractions, distortions. You can't respond to everything. Donald Trump is a master of this. By the time you fact check line number 4, he's on line number 17. You can't keep up with him. So that the Gish galloper, it basically relies on you being time poor as an interviewer or a debater, and therefore takes advantage of that to exploit it. He or she knows that you can't respond to everything. So Steve Bannon had a line. He said, flood the zone with shit. Flood the zone. That's how you just stop everything. And that's what they do. So I say in the book, look, there's not just Trump these days. There's a bunch of mini Trumps. It's gone global. I see politicians everywhere.
People would say that, not to the same extent as Donald Trump possibly, but Boris Johnson's very similar.
100%.
Just keep on talking, chucking out
Exactly.
irrelevance
Exactly.
and sideshows and not quites and almosts.
Exactly. And I think Boris does do that. I've seen a lot of politicians around the world copy the Trumpian style because it works. Yeah. What I say in the book is it's actually very hard to stop, because it actually is super cynically effective, because nobody, not even the greatest interviewer on earth, can... I give an example in the book. In the first presidential debate, if people remember in 2020, Trump goes through a 2-minute spiel, uninterrupted, where Chris Wallace tries to stop him. He says a lie every 9 seconds. Now, the greatest individual on earth cannot just rebut that many lies. So I say in the book, what you do is you've got to pick your battle with somebody who's doing that. You forget 99 lies, pick one of the 100 lies, focus on that, make an example of that one. Number 2, don't budge. Too many interviews, especially on that side of the pond, will move on too quickly. No follow-up question. You've got to persist. Less is more. And the third one is call it out. Point out that this is a strategy of disorientation. It's a strategy, a cynical strategy to BS.
It's the, sort of wondering, if you put it all together, winning the argument, how much that actually depends on having the best argument. Is it to do with the showmanship, you know, your opponent and their ability as a showman? And if actually you've got two of you who are doing the same thing, you just sort of cancel each other out. The argument becomes irrelevant. Who's got the best argument?
So it's a great question. And just on the latter point about two people, the joke, a lot of people keep making the same joke on social media. If me and someone else buys your book, who's going to win? And people keep posting the Spider-Man meme. But no, you're right to highlight that point. And I'm sorry to be a party pooper here to people who are going to believe in the great ideals of rhetoric. You're right. No, the person with the best substance doesn't win. One of the reasons I wrote the book is because I'm so frustrated of seeing people, especially on the liberal left, have the right stats and the data and the good point, but not deploy them in a persuasive or effective way. I look at the Brexit referendum and I think the Brexiteers were smart in focusing on emotion, something I talk about in the book, that engage with people's sovereignty, freedom, while the anti-Brexit were like, oh, here's our data on trade. Well, that's not going to win anyone over. I think it was Plato who tells the story of if a rhetorician and a doctor were to go town to town giving medical advice, people wouldn't listen to the doctor. They'd listen to the rhetorician because he expresses himself better. Like the evolutionist versus the creationist versus the evolutionist. The evolutionary biologist is right on the facts, but the creationist, the Gish galloper, was better at expressing it. So it is part, I'm sorry to be, it sounds cynical, but it's just a reality of human life that you can have all the great facts, but if I can speak better than you, if I'm more persuasive than you with the audience, they're going to believe me over you.
Is there a left-right thing? Are the right better
Yes.
at arguing? I mean, if you look at just British politics in the last 40 years, the left have been in power for 13 of them. Are they just better at understanding all of that? And so when the left complain about the right, they need to get... Is it the Brexit example is the prime example of that?
100%.
You lost the argument.
100%. I believe that the right understand how human beings work much better, but understand human nature. Because I'm a critic of especially people on the right today, I think they do it in a kind of dark way. So I have a chapter on emotions. It's not just facts, it's feelings I talk about, right? You don't just chuck a bunch of statistics at someone and say, hey, I've won the argument, right? You have to engage emotionally. Take 2016, Matt. Donald Trump runs a campaign, build a wall, ban Muslims, lock her up. Very emotive, easy to remember, gets people worked up at rallies, they're shouting, lock her up. Hillary Clinton comes along, here's my 17-point childcare plan. Great, I'm sure it's a great childcare plan, but it's not going to rouse anyone up. So what I say in the book is, like, if liberal left want to understand that human beings are not creatures of logic, creatures of emotion, you've got to equally rouse them, energize them, inspire them. You've got to convince people here, not just here.
What's your reading? I mean, you're clearly in America now, but what's your reading of British politics? You wrote a book on, I remember you wrote a book on Ed Miliband. I did. We've now got this sort of situation in British politics. We've got two quite similar temperamentally people in Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. So who do you think is more likely to win the argument?
So that's interesting. I think what's interesting is, you know, Matt, better than me, that oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. The reason Keir Starmer has, 25, whatever ridiculous lead he has in the polls, a lead I refuse to believe, is not because Keir Starmer is the love child of Tony Blair and Clement Attlee. It's not because he's some super Barack Obama-esque politician. He's in the right place at the right time. Let's be very honest about that. I always think about Tony Blair, who won a landslide majority in 97. John Smith would have won too. He wouldn't have won a landslide majority, but he would have won too. Yeah. So I think that he doesn't need to win the argument, in a sense, not to do down my own book and the relevance to this question, but I don't think it's really about that right now. I mean, I don't think either of them are great orators. I think Rishi Sunak is a charisma-free zone every time I see him speak. I have a chapter in the book on the importance of humour. I would advise him to read that chapter if he gets a chance. You could do with some humour, self-deprecating humour in particular. But yeah, neither of them seem to be great orators, but Keir Starmer seems to just be the right man in the right time, because this government has just done so much chaotic stuff. You mentioned Ed Miliband. I cannot shake that famous image of David Cameron. What did he say? Stability, chaos with Ed Miliband, with
yes,
Labour, stability with me.
Chaos Ed Miliband.
And then I look at the last 8 years and I think, has there ever been a greater lie, a greater nonsensical, that didn't age well line than that one? I mean, these Tories, I was saying earlier to someone, do you know how hard it was for me, Matt, to explain to a team of American TV producers and then to an American audience what was going on in the UK at the end of last year? Like, American politics is the craziest politics
in the world. It was quite hard for us here to explain to people.
American politics is the craziest politics in the world. And the Brits are like, hold my beer. Like, come on. Everyone in America now knows about lettuce. They know about British politics. They know that a lettuce outlasted the Prime Minister. So
where are we going now? Do we continue on this ever spiralling downward spiral into Trumpism and Boris Johnsonism? Or is there a point where everyone gets fed up with that and the pendulum swings back the other way and you get boring Joe Biden, you get boring Keir Starmer, and actually people just want everything to calm down a bit, and the trick, you can't keep pulling off that trick?
That's a great question. I think that, I hope it's the second one, obviously. My heart says the second one. My head says the first one. It's going to get worse before it gets better, especially with social media, which aggravates a lot of this stuff. One thing I'd say about, you mentioned Biden Starmer. I mean, Biden is not a great orator, clearly. But what he is he's authentic. Yeah. And I don't think Starmer can claim the title of authenticity in the same way. Biden, whatever you think about Biden, and the reason he's done well is, okay, he's not a great orator, okay, you might not like his politics, but when he says something, he's not reading from a teleprompter, it's not talking points that a spin doctor's given to him, it's him. In fact, they beg him not to say the stuff he says. So I think that helps, and again, I talk about in the book about the importance of authenticity, of being you, finding the right balance between the research, the prep. I talk about practice your delivery in front of a mirror, practice with friends, but also be you, don't be completely someone else. So I think that helps him a great deal. But you're right, is there a point where it becomes diminishing returns from this stuff? I think it depends on you and I and our industry. Fundamentally, all roads lead back to the media, because one of the reasons these people have been able to get away with the BSing is because we haven't held them to account in the way they should have been held to account. And what I'm trying to do in the US media, and what has improved in recent years, I won't take credit for it, but what has improved is people are doing tougher interviews. I give an example in the book of my friend Jonathan Swan, who's also an outsider,
from
Australian.
Access.
Interesting comment. I'm from Britain, he's from Australia. We do tougher interviews than others. He comes in and does the strongest interview of Donald Trump that anyone's ever done. So people are slowly coming around to, in the US media, there was a time when no one said the L word. You don't say lie, you can't accuse someone of lying. R word, racism, you can't say racism. And even the F word, which is one I've used for a while, which is fascism. And I think the more media is willing to kind of call this stuff out, the better. And I think that's happening in some places, not others. But ultimately, if they succeed, the BSers and the Gish gallopers, it's because we let them.
Last question then. If you could go up against Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, who would you prefer to go up against?
To like interview or debate?
Interview, debate.
I mean,
see if you can win the argument.
You have to say Trump, right? I mean, it's just the novelty factor. And with Trump,
but do you think you'd win? Even having written the book and done the research?
I don't think he would let the interview. I think he would walk out after question 1 or 2. I think once he started realising this is not going in his direction, I think he wanted to walk out on Jonathan Swan.
You must know what's question 1 when you sit down with Trump.
I always joke that one thing I would love to do with Donald Trump that I wish White House correspondents had done is just ask him fact questions. Yeah. People ask him his opinion. He's got a lot of opinions. I don't care about his opinion. I want to say, Mr. President, or if he's still president, what does NATO stand for? Yeah. What does WHO stand for? When are you going to Wakanda? Those are the kind of questions I'd like to ask him.
They're much better, when we see it at PMQs. If you ask us
a simple factual question,
it's much more powerful.
There's too much opinion.
Yeah, that's true of everything.
That's true of everything, including me. I do an opinion show.
You do an opinion show, you're allowed to. Mehdi Hasan, thanks so much for joining us on
Thank you so much, Matt.
Good to see you.